I thought I was getting engaged this weekend. Now I feel sad and gross. I'm gonna say up front, I don't deal with disappointment easily. Never have. Not since I was little. It's the one emotion that just completely floods out rational thought and control from my mind. I always end up crying no matter how hard I try to fight it. That being said, this weekend was my 27F 4-year anniversary with my boyfriend, 27M. We live together, both have well-paying jobs, and are very open about our future together. We talk about marriage a lot. This isn't something we're weird about, and he's even told me he's had a ring picked out for over a year. Our relationship has been filled with joy, laughter, and countless adventures. We've traveled the world together, exploring new cities and creating unforgettable memories. From the moment we met, there was an undeniable spark between us. He swept me off my feet with his charm, wit, and unwavering devotion. I couldn't help but fall head over heels in love with him. As the years passed, our bond only grew stronger. We moved in together, combining our lives and creating a cozy home filled with love and warmth. Late-night conversations about our hopes and dreams for the future became a regular occurrence. We talked about getting married, starting a family, and growing old together. It all seemed so certain, so inevitable. My boyfriend's thoughtfulness never ceased to amaze me. He always remembered the little things, like my favorite flowers or the way I take my coffee. He'd surprise me with heartfelt gestures, leaving love notes around the house or planning spontaneous date nights. His love for me was palpable in every action, every word. So when he came to me a few months ago and told me he had booked us a trip to upstate NY for our anniversary, I was genuinely surprised. It was out of character for him to take the reins on planning a trip, as I was usually the one who handled the details. But I was thrilled nonetheless. The idea of spending quality time together in a beautiful setting sounded perfect. However, as the trip approached, a small seed of hope began to grow in my mind. The timing felt right, and I couldn't help but wonder if this trip was going to be more than just a romantic getaway. Was he planning to propose? The thought alone sent butterflies fluttering in my stomach. I tried to push the idea aside, not wanting to get my hopes up too much. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. We had been together for 4 years, and our relationship was solid. We had already discussed marriage and our future together. Maybe this was finally the moment I had been dreaming of. As we packed our bags and prepared for the trip, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The anticipation was building, and I found myself daydreaming about the perfect proposal. Would he get down on one knee at a scenic overlook? Would he have a heartfelt speech prepared? The possibilities were endless. Little did I know, the trip would take an unexpected turn, and my hopes for a proposal would be met with a crushing disappointment that would leave me questioning everything. As the date of our anniversary trip approached, my excitement grew with each passing day. My boyfriend had taken care of all the arrangements, which was a pleasant surprise since I was usually the one planning our getaways. He had booked a charming bed and breakfast in a picturesque town nestled in the heart of upstate New York. The pictures online showcased stunning views of the surrounding mountains and quaint, tree-lined streets. I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation as I packed my bags. The fact that he had taken the initiative to plan this trip made it feel extra special. It wasn't just another vacation, it felt like a milestone in our relationship. I found myself imagining all the romantic moments we would share, the intimate conversations we would have, and the memories we would create together. As we set off on our journey, my mind began to wander. I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip held a greater significance than just celebrating our anniversary. The timing seemed perfect. We had been together for 4 years, and we had openly discussed our future together. We had talked about marriage, about starting a family, and about building a life together. It all seemed to be falling into place. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that this trip was going to be the moment I had been dreaming of. The idea of my boyfriend getting down on one knee, expressing his love and commitment to me, sent a thrill through my body. I could picture the ring he had mentioned, the one he had picked out over a year ago, sparkling on my finger. I tried to keep my growing suspicions to myself, not wanting to spoil the surprise if my intuition was correct. But as the miles passed by and we drew closer to our destination, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of nerves and excitement in the pit of my stomach. Every passing landmark, every turn in the road felt like a step closer to a life-changing moment. When we finally arrived at the bed and breakfast, I was struck by its charm and beauty. The warm, inviting atmosphere seemed to promise a weekend filled with love and romance. As we settled into our room, I couldn't help but notice the extra effort my boyfriend had put into making everything perfect. From the fresh flowers on the bedside table to the bottle of champagne chilling in the mini-fridge, every detail seemed carefully planned. As we explored the town hand in hand, I found myself searching for signs that a proposal was imminent. Every time he reached into his pocket, my heart skipped a beat, wondering if he was reaching for a ring. Every time he led me to a scenic spot or suggested a romantic activity, I couldn't help but think, this could be it. Oh, but as the day wore on and no proposal came, I began to second-guess myself. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe this was just a beautiful anniversary trip, nothing more. I tried to push the thoughts aside and focus on enjoying the moment, but the seed of anticipation had already taken root in my mind. Little did I know the weekend would unfold in a way I never expected, leaving me grappling with a whirlwind of emotions and questioning everything I thought I knew about our relationship and our future together. In the days leading up to our anniversary trip, my anticipation grew even stronger. It wasn't just my own hopes and dreams fueling my expectations. It seemed like everyone around me was convinced that this was going to be the weekend my boyfriend would propose. My friends were the first to plant the seed. When I told them about our upcoming trip to upstate New York, their eyes widened with excitement. "Oh my gosh, do you think he's going to propose?" one of them asked, barely able to contain her glee. Another chimed in, "It's the perfect setting for a romantic proposal. I bet he's been planning this for months." Oh, at first I tried to brush off their comments, not wanting to get my hopes up too high. But as more and more of my friends expressed similar sentiments, it became harder to ignore the possibility. They pointed out all the signs, the timing of the trip, the fact that he had planned it all himself, and the romantic destination he had chosen. It was as if they had a sixth sense about these things. Adding to my growing suspicions was the news that my boyfriend's family would be flying across the country to visit us the weekend after we returned from our trip. This was highly unusual, as they rarely made the long journey to see us. My mind immediately started connecting the dots. Could they be coming to celebrate our engagement? The thought alone made my heart race with excitement. But the final piece of the puzzle came from my boyfriend himself. A few weeks before our trip, he made an offhand comment about needing to pay down his credit card. He mentioned that he had made a large purchase recently and wanted to get his balance under control. My mind immediately jumped to the ring he had mentioned picking out over a year ago. Could this be the purchase he was referring to? I couldn't help but feel like all the signs were pointing towards a proposal. It was as if the universe was conspiring to make my dreams come true. I found myself daydreaming about the moment he would get down on one knee, the words he would say, and the tears of joy that would inevitably flow. As the trip grew closer, I tried to temper my expectations, reminding myself that nothing was certain. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be a life-changing weekend. I started mentally preparing myself for the big moment, imagining how I would react and what I would say when he popped the question. I even caught myself browsing engagement rings online, trying to guess which one he might have chosen. I pictured myself calling my family and friends to share the happy news, their voices filled with joy and congratulations. But as much as I tried to keep my expectations in check, the seed had been planted. The comments from my friends, the impending family visit, and my boyfriend's cryptic comment about a large purchase all fed into my growing belief that a proposal was imminent. Little did I know the weekend would unfold in a way that would shatter my expectations and leave me grappling with a roller coaster of emotions. The proposal I had been dreaming of would remain just that, a dream, and I would be left to navigate the aftermath of my own misguided hopes and assumptions. As our anniversary weekend unfolded, my boyfriend's behavior only seemed to confirm my suspicions that a proposal was on the horizon. From the moment we arrived at the bed and breakfast, he was extra attentive and affectionate. He held my hand at every opportunity, pulling me close for impromptu kisses and whispering sweet nothings in my ear. It was as if he couldn't get enough of me, and I reveled in the attention. On the second day of our trip, he suggested we go on a scenic hike to a nearby overlook. The way he described it, with its breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains and the promise of a secluded spot, made my heart flutter. This had to be it, I thought. The perfect setting for a romantic proposal. As we set out on the hike, my anticipation grew with each step. The trail wound through a lush forest, the sunlight filtering through the leaves and casting a magical glow on everything it touched. My boyfriend held my hand tightly, guiding me over the uneven terrain and ensuring I didn't stumble. His care and concern only added to the butterflies in my stomach. When we finally reached the overlook, I was stunned by the beauty that lay before us. The view was even more spectacular than I had imagined, with rolling hills and distant peaks stretching out as far as the eye could see. It was the kind of place that took your breath away and made you feel small in the grand scheme of things. My boyfriend led me to a large, flat rock that offered the perfect vantage point. We sat down, our legs dangling over the edge, and took in the stunning panorama. The moment felt charged with emotion, and I couldn't help but feel like this was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I turned to look at my boyfriend, expecting to see him reaching into his pocket for a ring. But instead he was gazing out at the view, a content smile on his face. Minutes passed and still nothing happened. The anticipation began to fizzle, replaced by confusion and a growing sense of unease. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my boyfriend turned to me and said, "Isn't this view incredible? I'm so glad we could share this moment together." His words were sincere, but they fell flat in the face of my expectations. Where was the proposal? Where was the declaration of love and commitment? I tried to hide my disappointment, forcing a smile and nodding in agreement. But inside, I felt a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Had I misread the signs? Had I gotten so caught up in my own hopes and dreams that I had projected them onto this trip? We sat there for a while longer, taking in the view and making small talk. But the magic of the moment had been tainted by my unfulfilled expectations. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that the trip wasn't unfolding the way I had imagined it would. As we made our way back down the trail, my mind was racing with questions and doubts. I tried to reassure myself that the trip wasn't over yet, that there was still time for a proposal. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had gotten ahead of myself, that I had set myself up for disappointment. Little did I know, the real turning point of the weekend was yet to come. The lunch conversation that followed would shatter my remaining hopes and leave me grappling with a whirlwind of emotions I wasn't prepared to face. After the anticlimactic hike, we decided to grab lunch at a nearby restaurant. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't shake the lingering disappointment from the overlook. The conversation felt strained, and I found myself struggling to engage in the usual banter that flowed so easily between us. Finally, in an attempt to break the tension, I asked my boyfriend if he had any other plans for the weekend. It was a casual question, but deep down I was hoping he would mention a surprise or a special moment he had been saving for later. His response caught me off guard. "Nope, that was the only thing I had planned for today," he said with a shrug. "Unless you want to do anything else." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. No other plans? No surprise proposal? I tried to mask my disappointment, but I could feel my face falling despite my best efforts. That's when my boyfriend said something that made my heart drop. "You know, I thought you might be expecting a proposal this weekend," he said with a slight chuckle. Even my mom mentioned it when I told her about the trip, but I told her that definitely wasn't happening. Oh, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Not only had he known about my expectations, but he had actively dismissed them. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me, my cheeks burning with shame. Had I been that transparent? Had I made a fool of myself by getting so caught up in my own hopes and dreams? I tried to laugh it off, to play it cool. "Oh no, I wasn't expecting anything like that," I lied, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "I was just curious if you had any other surprises planned, that's all." Oh, but my boyfriend saw right through me. He gave me a sympathetic look, as if he could sense the disappointment and embarrassment radiating off me. "I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression," he said gently. "I just wanted this to be a special weekend for us, to celebrate our anniversary. I didn't mean to make you think it was anything more than that." "Oh," I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. I felt silly, like a lovesick teenager who had gotten carried away with her own fantasies. I had built up this entire weekend in my mind, convinced myself that a proposal was imminent, and now I was left feeling foolish and let down. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur. I picked at my food, my appetite gone, while my boyfriend tried to keep the conversation light and easy. But I couldn't shake the sense of embarrassment and disappointment that clung to me like a second skin. As we left the restaurant, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The weekend I had been so looking forward to, the one I had pinned all my hopes and dreams on, had taken a turn I never expected. And now, I was left to grapple with the fallout of my own misguided expectations. Little did I know the emotional roller coaster was far from over. The breakdown that followed would push me to the brink, forcing me to confront the depth of my disappointment and the cracks in our seemingly perfect relationship. As we left the restaurant, I felt like I was in a daze. The disappointment and embarrassment from the lunch conversation still weighed heavily on my mind, and I struggled to keep my composure. My boyfriend, sensing my distress, tried to lighten the mood with casual conversation, but his words fell flat against the turmoil raging inside me. Just as we were about to exit, a nearby couple's conversation caught my attention. They were sitting at a table close to ours, and their voices carried over the din of the restaurant. "I can't believe you proposed," the woman exclaimed, her eyes shining with joy. "I'm so happy I can't wait to start planning our wedding." "Oh," her partner smiled, taking her hand in his. "I've been waiting for the perfect moment, and today just felt right. I love you so much, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you." Oh, their words were like a knife twisting in my gut. Here I was, sitting across from my own boyfriend, the man I had hoped would propose to me this weekend, and instead, I was listening to strangers celebrate their own engagement. The irony was not lost on me. I tried to tune out their conversation to focus on anything else, but their happiness was like a magnet, drawing my attention no matter how much I resisted. Each word, each expression of love and excitement felt like a personal affront, a reminder of what I had been so desperately hoping for and had now lost. Despite my best efforts, I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. I tried to blink them back, to swallow the lump in my throat, but it was no use. A single tear escaped, rolling down my cheek before I could stop it. My boyfriend noticed immediately. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine, his eyes filled with concern. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked softly. I shook my head, unable to speak. The tears were falling freely now, and I could feel the curious stares of the other diners burning into my skin. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like my deepest desires and disappointments were on display for all to see. Without a word, my boyfriend stood up, taking my hand and leading me out of the restaurant. We walked in silence back to our hotel room, the weight of the unsaid hanging heavily between us. Once we were behind closed doors, I couldn't hold back any longer. The floodgates opened, and I broke down in gut-wrenching sobs. I cried for the proposal that never came, for the hopes and dreams that had been shattered, for the foolishness I felt for allowing myself to get so caught up in my own expectations. My boyfriend held me as I cried, his arms wrapped tightly around me, his hands rubbing soothing circles on my back. He whispered words of comfort, telling me that he loved me, that he was sorry for not realizing how much this meant to me. But even as he tried to console me, I couldn't shake the feeling of despair that had settled over me. I felt like I had ruined everything, like my own expectations and desires had somehow tainted the purity of our love. I wondered if I had pushed him away, if my desperation for a proposal had made him reconsider our future together. As the sobs subsided and the tears dried on my cheeks, I was left with a hollow feeling in my chest. The weekend I had been so looking forward to, the one I had hoped would be a turning point in our relationship, had instead become a source of pain and confusion. I knew we would need to talk, to work through the fallout of my breakdown and the underlying issues that had led to it. But for now, all I could do was cling to my boyfriend, seeking comfort in his embrace, and try to make sense of the shattered pieces of my own heart. In the wake of my emotional breakdown, a heavy silence settled over the hotel room. My boyfriend held me close, his arms providing a comforting sanctuary as I tried to regain my composure. The tears had subsided, but the ache in my heart remained, a dull throb that refused to be ignored. Finally, my boyfriend broke the silence. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice laced with genuine remorse. "I had no idea how much this weekend meant to you, how much you were hoping for a proposal. I feel like an idiot for not realizing the optics of the situation." "Oh," I pulled back slightly, meeting his gaze. His eyes were filled with concern and regret, and I could see the weight of his own guilt bearing down on him. "It's not your fault," I said softly, my voice hoarse from crying. "I should have been more clear about my expectations. I shouldn't have gotten so caught up in my own hopes and dreams." "Oh," but even as the words left my mouth, I couldn't shake the feeling of self-blame that had taken root in my heart. I had built up this weekend in my mind, convinced myself that a proposal was imminent, and now I was left to grapple with the consequences of my own misguided assumptions. I feared that by expressing my disappointment, by breaking down so completely, I had somehow ruined the possibility of a genuine proposal in the future. What if my boyfriend now felt pressured, like he had to propose just to placate me? What if the magic and spontaneity of the moment had been lost, tainted by my own desperation? These thoughts swirled in my mind, a vortex of self-doubt and recrimination. I tried to push them aside, to focus on the present moment and the man who loved me, but they lingered like a dark cloud on the horizon. My boyfriend, sensing my inner turmoil, pulled me closer. "Hey," he said gently, tilting my chin up to meet his gaze. "I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. That hasn't changed. I'm sorry for not realizing how important this was to you, but please don't blame yourself. We'll get through this together." "Oh," his words were a balm to my battered heart, and I clung to them like a lifeline. I knew he meant every word, that his love for me was true and unwavering. But still the doubts persisted, whispering in the back of my mind like a malevolent presence. In the days that followed, I tried to put on a brave face. I smiled and laughed, determined to salvage what was left of our anniversary weekend. I didn't want my boyfriend to see how deeply the disappointment had cut me, how much I was still struggling with the fallout of my own expectations. But beneath the surface, I was a mess of conflicting emotions. I oscillated between hope and despair, between love and fear. I wondered if I had irreparably damaged our relationship, if the specter of my disappointment would always hang over us like a dark cloud. As we packed our bags and prepared to leave the bed and breakfast, I tried to focus on the positive. We had shared some beautiful moments together, had created memories that would last a lifetime. And despite the pain and confusion of the weekend, I knew that our love was strong, that we could weather any storm. But even as I clung to that hope, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the cracks in our seemingly perfect relationship had been exposed. And as we drove back home, the road stretching out before us like an uncertain future, I knew that the journey ahead would be far from easy. As the day wore on, the initial shock of my emotional breakdown began to fade, but the disappointment lingered like a bitter aftertaste. I tried to push it aside, to focus on the present moment and the man by my side, but it clung to me like a second skin, refusing to be ignored. We went through the motions of our anniversary weekend, visiting local attractions and trying to enjoy each other's company. But the easy banter and laughter that had always flowed so naturally between us now felt forced, strained by the weight of the unsaid. I caught myself withdrawing from my boyfriend both physically and emotionally. Every touch, every gesture of affection felt like a reminder of what I had hoped for and what had been denied. I found myself pulling away, putting distance between us as if to protect myself from further disappointment. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I did with every fiber of my being. But the sting of the unfulfilled proposal, the shattered expectations, had left me raw and vulnerable. I needed time to process, to come to terms with my own emotions and the reality of our situation. Throughout the day, I fought the urge to retreat into myself completely. I plastered a smile on my face, tried to engage in conversation and show enthusiasm for the activities we had planned. But it was a facade, a mask that barely concealed the turmoil raging beneath the surface. My boyfriend, to his credit, was patient and understanding. He gave me space when I needed it, offered words of comfort and reassurance when he sensed my distress. But even his love and support couldn't erase the disappointment that had taken root in my heart. As the sun began to set and we returned to our hotel room, the weight of the day's emotions finally caught up with me. I felt drained, emotionally and physically, as if I had been running a marathon with no end in sight. I longed for solitude, for a quiet space to process my thoughts and feelings without the pressure of putting on a brave face. I needed to confront the disappointment head on, to sit with it and let it wash over me, rather than pushing it down and pretending it didn't exist. Excusing myself to the bathroom, I closed the door behind me and sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cool tiles. In the silence of that small space, the tears began to flow once more, hot and heavy against my cheeks. I cried for the proposal that never came, for the hopes and dreams that had been dashed against the rocks of reality. I cried for the fear that I had somehow ruined the magic of our relationship, that my own desperate longing had tainted the purity of our love. But most of all, I cried for myself, for the foolish girl who had gotten so caught up in her own fantasies, who had pinned all her hopes and dreams on a single moment, a single question. As the tears subsided and my breathing steadied, I felt a glimmer of clarity pierce through the haze of disappointment. I knew that I couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the expectations I had set or the pain I had experienced. But I could choose how to move forward, how to navigate the aftermath of this weekend and the challenges that lay ahead. With a deep breath, I stood up and splashed cold water on my face, washing away the tears and the remnants of my breakdown. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be more conversations to be had and emotions to be processed. But for now, I had to find a way to keep going, to hold on to the love that had brought us this far, and trust that it would see us through whatever lay ahead. As the weekend drew to a close and we prepared to return home, I found myself grappling with a growing sense of isolation. The disappointment and emotional turmoil of the past few days weighed heavily on my mind, but I struggled to find an outlet for my feelings. I longed to confide in someone, to pour out my heart and seek comfort and guidance. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no one to turn to. My friends, while well-meaning, wouldn't understand the depth of my disappointment. They would offer platitudes and encouragement, but they couldn't truly grasp the complexity of my emotions. My family, too, felt like a dead end. They had always been supportive of my relationship, but I feared that confiding in them would only lead to more questions, more pressure. I couldn't bear the thought of their well-intentioned advice, their attempts to fix a situation that felt unfixable. And so I kept my pain to myself, bottling it up inside until it felt like I might burst from the pressure. I put on a brave face, smiled and laughed and pretended that everything was fine. But inside I was screaming, desperate for someone to see through the facade and offer a lifeline. As we drove back home, the miles stretching out before us, I couldn't shake the feeling of inconsequentiality that had settled over me. In the grand scheme of things, my disappointment over a missed proposal seemed trivial, selfish even. There were people in the world dealing with far greater struggles, facing challenges that made my own pale in comparison. But knowing that didn't make the pain any less real, any less consuming. It didn't ease the ache in my heart or the doubts that swirled in my mind. I felt like I was drowning in my own emotions, gasping for air in a sea of uncertainty. I tried to distract myself with idle conversation, with plans for the future and reminiscing about the past. But every word felt hollow, every smile forced. I was going through the motions, playing a role that felt increasingly foreign to me. As we finally pulled into our driveway, the familiar sight of our home offering little comfort, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The weekend had taken its toll, both physically and emotionally, and I longed for nothing more than to crawl into bed and shut out the world. But even as I collapsed onto the mattress, the silence of our bedroom closing in around me, I couldn't escape the thoughts that haunted me. The disappointment, the self-doubt, the fear that I had somehow irrevocably damaged our relationship. They all swirled together in a dizzying maelstrom, threatening to pull me under. I knew that I needed to find a way to process my emotions, to work through the pain and confusion that had taken root in my heart. But in that moment, faced with the daunting task of picking up the pieces of my shattered expectations, I felt utterly alone. As I lay there staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would my boyfriend and I be able to move past this weekend, to rebuild the trust and intimacy that had been strained by my own desperate longing? Or would this be the beginning of the end? A slow unraveling of the love we had fought so hard to build. Only time would tell, but in that moment, the uncertainty was almost more than I could bear. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come and offer a brief respite from the turmoil that raged within me. But even in my dreams, the specter of my disappointment lingered, a haunting reminder of all that had been lost and all that still hung in the balance. In the days that followed our anniversary weekend, I found myself grappling with a swirl of unresolved emotions. The disappointment, the self-doubt, the fear, they all lingered like unwelcome guests, refusing to be evicted from my mind. I tried to push them aside, to focus on the present and the love I shared with my boyfriend, but they clung to me like stubborn shadows. I knew that I needed to find a way to process my feelings, to work through the turmoil that had taken root in my heart. But every time I tried to broach the subject with my boyfriend, the words stuck in my throat, held back by a fear of vulnerability and the weight of my own expectations. And so, in a moment of desperation, I turned to the one outlet that had always provided a measure of solace: writing. I poured out my heart onto the page, spilling out the disappointment, the confusion, the ache of unfulfilled dreams. I wrote about the weekend that had meant so much to me, the hopes and fears that had swirled together in a dizzying dance. As I typed out the words, I felt a sense of catharsis wash over me. It was as if by giving voice to my emotions, by laying them bare on the screen, I was finally able to confront them head on. I wrote about the love I shared with my boyfriend, the deep bond that had brought us this far. I wrote about my own insecurities, my desperate longing for a proposal that had clouded my judgment and strained our relationship. And as I hit the final period, as I sat back and surveyed the raw, unfiltered truth of my own heart, I felt a glimmer of hope pierce through the haze of disappointment. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be more conversations to be had and wounds to be healed. But I also knew that by sharing my story, by giving voice to the pain and confusion that had consumed me, I had taken the first step towards healing. I hesitated for a moment before hitting the post button, my finger hovering over the key as doubts swirled in my mind. Would people understand? Would they judge me for my vulnerability, for the desperate longing that had driven me to this point? But in the end, I knew that I needed to do this for myself, to release the burden of my own emotions, and trust in the power of shared experience. As the likes and comments began to trickle in, as strangers and friends alike offered words of comfort and understanding, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't alone in my struggles, in my hopes and fears and disappointments. There were others out there who had walked similar paths, who had grappled with the same questions and doubts. But even as I found solace in the virtual embrace of my online community, I knew that the true test lay ahead. My boyfriend and I still had much to discuss, much to work through in the aftermath of our anniversary weekend. The disappointment and strain that had taken root in our relationship wouldn't disappear overnight, and I knew that it would take time and effort to rebuild the trust and intimacy that had been shaken. But I also knew that we had a strong foundation to build upon, a love that had weathered countless storms and emerged stronger for it. And as I closed my laptop and turned to face the man I loved, I felt a renewed sense of determination wash over me. We would get through this together, one day at a time, one honest conversation at a time. The road ahead was uncertain, the future still unwritten. But in that moment, as I took my boyfriend's hand and met his gaze with a tentative smile, I knew that we would face it together, armed with the power of our love and the hard-won wisdom of our shared experience. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.